The ice cracked, not with a sound, but with a feeling as sickening. Final shudder that traveled up through the soles of her bare feet and into the very marrow of her bones. Then it gave way. The water was not just cold. It was a devouring, silent scream. It stole the breath from her lungs before she could even gasp, flooding her mouth with the bitter, metallic taste of winter and weeds. The heavy wool of her simple dress, the mark of an unmated and unwanted female in the Winter Lake pack, became a leaden shroud, dragging her down into the dark. Her arms flailed, instinct battling the paralyzing shock. Above, the jagged hole of pale gray sky framed silhouetted faces peering down. No one moved to help. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a watchful, chilling silence. Her hands, already numb, scraped against the slick underside of the ice, finding no purchase, only a seamless, murderous ceiling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Her name was Alora, and this was her punishment. The thought was a dull spike in the roaring panic. Punishment for the life growing inside her, a life with no father she could name, a mystery her body had stubbornly refused to explain, even under the Alpha's furious questioning. Punishment for the shame she'd brought to a pack already on the brink of poverty and dissolution. They had stripped her of her boots, marched her to the lake center, and told her the moon goddess would judge. If she was innocent, the ice would hold. It did not. Something in her chest, deeper than the cold, began to fracture. It was the last fragile thread of hope she hadn't even known she'd deep been clinging to, that they would see, that they would remember she had been one of them, a daughter of Winter Lake, loyal and quiet and enduring, that they would not do this. They did! The ache of that betrayal was warmer than the water. It was a fire in her soul guttering out. Her struggles grew weaker. The dark below was peaceful. It promised no more cold looks, no more whispered slurs, no more aching, hollow loneliness that even the child within her couldn't fill. Her eyes, stinging from the frozen water, began to close. A second crack, thunderous and violent, split the world. Not from her weakening thrashing. From above. A massive shape, darker than the surrounding ice, blotted out the sky. It struck the water a foot away from her with a force that sent a shockwave through the lake, jolting her back into a state of raw, terrified awareness. Water churned. A strong arm, hard as iron and impossibly warm, wrapped around her waist, yanking her against a chest that felt like a forge. She was moving upward, breaking the surface in a gasp that was half water, half agonized air. The cold hit her anew, 1,000 biting knives, but now there was a barrier between her and its full force. Him. He held her as if she weighed nothing, his other arm sweeping forward to shatter a path through the ice toward the shore with terrifying, casual power. The ice splintered and groaned in protest, yielding to his raw strength. She could only choke and tremble, her body convulsing against his. Voices rose from the bank, shouts of alarm, of fear, the word Alpha, hissed like a prayer and a curse. Alpha? Her mind, sluggish with cold and shock, fumbled. Her Alpha, Gray, was on the shore, watching. This wasn't him. The scent, it was all wrong. It was not pine and frost, the scent of Winter Lake. This was smoke and deep earth and a strange wild spice that cut through the water, clogging her nostrils. It was a scent that demanded a reaction her dying body couldn't muster. He reached the bank and surged out of the water in one fluid motion. The gasps of the crowd became a dead silence. He stood, water streaming from him in rivers, and set her on her feet. Her legs buckled immediately, but he didn't let her fall, keeping one firm arm around her, turning her to face the assembled pack. Elara's vision blurred, but she saw him clearly. He was a stranger, and he was king. He was taller, broader than any man in her pack, his simple black travel clothes plastered to a frame of pure, formidable power. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, was plastered to his stern, brutally handsome face. High cheekbones, a jaw like cut stone, and lips set in a line of unforgiving fury. But it was his eyes that held her, that held everyone. They were burning, luminous gold alpha eyes, but of an intensity she had never seen. They glowed with a primal authority that made the air itself feel heavy. His gaze swept over the pack who had begun to kneel, their heads bowed low. It passed over Alpha Gray, who stood stiffly, his face pale with a different kind of cold. Then those fiery eyes looked down at her. The fury in them did not soften, but it changed, narrowed, focused solely on her. She saw her own reflection in them, a drowned, pathetic creature, lips blue, skin deathly pale, her wet hair plastered over her face and the slight, betraying curve of her belly. She tried to stand straighter, to summon some shred of the dignity that had been her only armor for months. A violent tremor wrecked her body instead. A pregnant female, the stranger said, his voice low. It was not loud, but it carried across the frozen lake, deep and resonant, vibrating in her bones. Thrown into a frozen lake by her own pack. Explain this. It was not a question. It was a command that promised devastation. Alpha Gray stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. Alpha, King Kieran. We did not expect your visit until the full moon. This is an internal matter, a disgrace. She carries a bastard, refused to name the sire, and has broken pack law. The words landed like stones. Alpha King. The shock was a new kind of cold. The tales of the Alpha King of the Northern Territories were legend. A ruler of ruthless efficiency and unassailable power, who held the allegiance of a dozen packs, including their own failing one. He was their ultimate sovereign, a distant, formidable figure. And he was here, holding her shivering body against his. King Kieran's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around her. The law says you execute traitors and warriors in combat, not drown unmated females in ice. His gaze returned to Alara. What is your name? She tried to speak. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue, the coppery taste of blood mixing with lake water. Alara, she managed, the word a shattered whisper. Did you consent to this judgment, Alara? The directness of the question, the way his eyes pinned her, saw through the cold and into the raw, bleeding core of her, stripped her bare. She shook her head, a minute desperate movement. No more words came. The Alpha King looked back at Gray. You have ceded your authority. This pack is under my direct rule until I deem otherwise. The female comes with me. A murmur rippled through the kneeling pack. Alpha Gray's head snapped up, outrage flashing in his eyes before he quickly banked it. My king, with respect, she's a criminal. And she is unwell. The ice sickness will claim her by nightfall. She will only be a burden. Alara felt a fresh wave of dizziness. He was right. The deep, penetrating cold was already settling into her organs, a fatal chill. She could feel it leaching the last of her strength. King Kieran didn't bother to reply to Gray. He simply bent and, in one swift motion, hooked his other arm under her knees, lifting her completely against his chest. A jolt went through her at the sudden intimacy, the sheer enveloping heat of him. It was an agony and a bliss so sharp it made her whimper. My healer is at my lodge, he said, as if stating a simple fact. He began to walk, his stride long and sure, carrying her away from the lake, away from the pack, through the gauntlet of their stunned, fearful faces. She wanted to protest, to demand to be put down, to cling to the last shred of her fractured pride, but her body had surrendered. Her head lolled against the solid wall of his chest. The scent of him smoke, earth, spice, power filled her senses, a strange anchor in the numb void. His heart beat a slow, powerful rhythm against her ear, a stark contrast to the frantic, dying flutter of her own. He carried her past the edge of the village, into the thick pine forest where a large, rustic lodge of dark timber sat, smoke hurling from its chimney. Guards in unfamiliar leathers and furs stood at attention, their eyes widening slightly at the sight of their king emerging from the woods, soaking wet and carrying a half-dead woman. Kieran shouldered his way inside, into a wave of blessed, almost overwhelming heat from a massive stone fireplace. The interior was spacious, masculine, filled with the smell of wood smoke, leather, and that same spicy scent that was uniquely his. He didn't stop in the main room, striding directly through a doorway into a smaller chamber dominated by a large bed piled with furs. An older man with kind, sharp eyes looked up from a kit of herbs and vials. Kieran, by the moon, what? Ice water, pregnant. Now, Cillian, Kieran commanded, his voice leaving no room for delay. He laid her on the furs with a surprising gentleness, but his movements were efficient, urgent. The healer, Cillian, was at her side in an instant, his hands moving to her throat, her wrist. Her pulse is faint. The cold is in her core. We need to get these wet clothes off her. She needs warmth immediately. Elara's mind screamed a weak protest, but her body was beyond her control. She could only lie there shuddering as Cillian began to work, his touch clinical but not unkind. King Kieran stood at the foot of the bed, a dark, dripping statue. His glowing golden eyes were fixed on her, watching the healer's every move. The fury was still there, but beneath it, Elara saw something else, a fierce, unwavering focus that was more terrifying than any anger. "Save them both," Kieran said, the words a low, unmistakable order that hung in the steam-filled air. Cillian nodded, already cutting away the sodden wool of her dress with a small knife. "I need hot stones, blankets straight from the hearth, and the moonwort tincture, quickly." Kieran turned and barked the orders to someone outside the door. Then he turned back. He didn't leave. He stood, a silent, powerful vigil, as the healer worked to pull her back from the edge of death. His presence filled the room, a pressure against her skin. As the first wave of deeper warmth from a heated fur settled over her, a treacherous foreign heat began to uncurl in her own frozen belly. It was faint, a single ember in a vast darkness. It was not from the external heat. It was a resonance, a quiet, impossible answer to the formidable, smoldering presence of a man who had pulled her from the ice. Her eyes, heavy and closing, found his one last time. In the depths of that glowing gold, she saw not pity, not even kindness, but a possessiveness so raw and sudden it stole what little breath she had left. It was the look of a man who had seen something he had not expected to find, and who had already decided, on a level deeper than law or logic, that it was his, mine. The word did not leave his lips, but it echoed in the bond she had been taught her whole life to listen for, the bond that had been silent and barren within her. A bond that now, in the moment of her dying, gave a single, seismic, silent click into place. Mate. The revelation was the last thing she knew before the darkness. Warm and smelling of smoke and wild spice, swallowed her whole. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Darkness was not empty. It was a sea of sensation of distant, echoing sounds, of pressure and warmth that was not her own, of a scent that had woven itself into the fabric of her being. Smoke, earth, spice. It was the anchor line tethering her to a world she was trying to flee, because the return to consciousness promised pain of a different, more complicated kind. The first thing she felt was the ache. It lived in every joint, a deep, marrow-throbbing reminder of the cold that had nearly claimed her. But layered over it was a pervasive, gentle heat. It seeped into her from all sides, from the impossibly soft furs beneath her, from the weight of blankets over her, from the air itself. Fragrant with dried herbs and a lingering, masculine trace of him, Elara opened her eyes. She was in the bedchamber of the lodge. Firelight danced on timber walls, painting them in gold and shadow. She was naked beneath the mountain of furs, a fact that sent a flush of shame through her lethargy. But the shame was a pale, weak thing next to the overwhelming reality of her physical state. She was alive. Her body, though aching, felt tended. The fatal deep chill was gone. And then she felt the other thing. It was a presence in her chest, a low, steady hum like a plucked string. It was not her own heartbeat. It was separate, yet intrinsically tied to her. It thrummed with a quiet, formidable power, and it pulled her awareness, like a compass needle, toward the door. Mate. The word crashed into her again, no less devastating for its silence. It was not a question. It was a truth, written in the language of her very soul, a language she'd been told was dead to her. An unmated, disgraced female, carrying a mystery child, she was the last person the moon goddess would bless with a fated bond. And yet, the bond was there. Faint, new, and terrifyingly one-sided in its intensity. She could feel him, a roiling storm of restraint, authority, and a fury that had not yet abated. She could feel his proximity, a magnetic pull against her ribs. The door opened silently. King Kieran filled the frame. He had changed into dry clothes, a dark gray tunic and trousers that did nothing to soften the imposing lines of his body. His hair was damp, brushed back from his forehead. He looked less like a wild force of nature and more like a sovereign, but the wildness was still there, banked in the glow of his eyes as they found hers. Elora's breath hitched. She had no armor, no wet, filthy dress, no pride, not even the veil of unconsciousness. She was laid bare in every sense, and his gaze held her there. "You're awake." His voice was the same low resonance, but stripped of a lakeside fury. It was a statement, flat and controlled. She tried to speak, but her throat was a desert. She managed a weak nod, her fingers clutching the furs tighter under her chin. He moved into the room, not toward her, but to a table where a pitcher and cup sat. He poured water, the simple act somehow deliberate and graceful. He approached the bed, and the hum in her chest intensified, a physical vibration. He stopped a foot away, holding out the clay cup. "Drink, slowly." Elora pushed herself up on trembling elbows, the furs pooling at her waist. She kept her eyes down, unable to meet that burning gaze, and took the cup. Their fingers did not touch. He had made sure of it. The water was cool and clean, washing away the phantom taste of the lake. She drank, the silence between them thick enough to choke on. "The healer says you will recover," Kieran said, his tone still that careful, neutral pitch. "The child is unharmed." The cold did not reach it. A sob, sudden and violent, rose in her throat. She choked it back, swallowing water instead. The relief was so acute it was a new kind of pain. She had not allowed herself to think of the baby, to hope for it, during that plunge into the dark, to hear it was safe. She nodded again, fiercely, eyes stinging with hot tears she refused to shed in front of him. "Why?" The words scraped out of her, raw and broken. A beat of silence. He knew what she was asking, not why he saved her. But why her? "I do not tolerate the wasteful slaughter of pack members," he said, his voice hardening at the edges. "Especially not on a king's territory, on the eve of a royal visit." It is inelegant. It was a political answer, a king's answer. It deliberately ignored the elephant in the room, the bond humming between them like a live wire. He was denying it, or perhaps he didn't feel it. The thought was a lance of irrational hurt. Was she so broken that even a mate bond was defective? "My pack," she began, her voice gaining a little strength, "is no longer your pack," he interrupted, finality in every syllable. Alpha Grey's judgment was forfeit the moment he condemned you without a proper tribunal. "Winterlake is under my stewardship, you are under my protection." Protection? The word tasted bitter. Or your prisoner. For the first time, his controlled expression shifted. A flicker of something dangerous, almost predatory, crossed his features. "You are many things, Elora of Winterlake. A prisoner is not one of them. What am I, then?" The question was a whisper, loaded with all her fear and confusion. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes tracing the lines of her face, the shadow of exhaustion under her eyes, the way her damp hair clung to her neck. The air crackled. The hum in her chest became a pull, a yearning so acute it felt like a physical ache. "You are a complication," he said at last, the word leaving his lips like a verdict. "One I did not anticipate. Rest. Cillian will bring you broth and a draught for the pain. We will speak of your situation. When you are stronger," he turned to leave, the connection stretching taut as he moved away. "You feel it too," she said, the words leaving her without permission. He froze, his back to her. The broad line of his shoulders tensed. The storm she felt through the bonds swelled, a chaos of conflict she could not decipher. "Feel what?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The pull." She had no name for it she dared to use. He half turned, his profile etched in firelight. His jaw was clenched. "What I feel is the disruption of a territory on the brink of collapse. What I feel is the consequences of a weak alpha's poor judgment. What I feel is a responsibility I did not ask for. His glowing eyes met hers over his shoulder. Do not confuse duty with destiny, Alara. It is a luxury neither of us can afford. He left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her alone with the roar of his rejection and the persistent, undeniable truth beating in time with her heart. Mate. The next 2 days passed, in a blur of quiet routine and simmering tension. Cillian, the healer, was a kind but no-nonsense presence. He ensured she ate the fortifying broths, drank the herbal tonics, and rested. He confirmed the baby's health with a gentle, professional touch that held no judgment. He spoke little of the outside world, but his silence was more telling than words. Alara could feel the pack outside. Their fear, their curiosity, their resentment were a faint buzz against the overwhelming signal of Kieran's presence. He was a constant. Even when he wasn't in the lodge, she could feel the direction of him, the ebb and flow of his intensity. He did not visit her again. On the third morning, she could stand the confinement no longer. Strength had returned to her limbs, though a deep fatigue remained. Cillian had left a simple, sturdy dress of dark blue wool, nothing like the coarse, undyed garment of an unmated Winter Lake female, and a pair of soft boots. Dressing felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. She ventured out of the bedroom into the main lodge room. It was empty, save for the crackling fire. The space was clean, functional, imposing. A large desk was strewn with maps and scrolls. Weapons were mounted on the walls not for show, but well-used axes and bows. This was a warrior's lodge, a king's temporary command post. She moved to the large window, looking out at the frozen landscape of her home. The lake lay in the distance, a flat white scar. She could see figures moving among the village huts, and a contingent of Kieran's guards stationed at the perimeter. Her world had been reduced to this view, this prison of safety. The door opened and the hum in her chest spiked. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. The air changed, charged and thick. You should be resting. She turned slowly. He stood just inside the door, dusted with a fine powder of snow. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, assessing, missing nothing. The directness of his look was a physical touch. I am rested enough, she said, forcing her voice to steadiness. I need air to understand what happens now. What happens now? He said, striding to the desk. As I determine the future of Winter Lake Pack, their alpha's failure is absolute. He will be stripped of his title. A new alpha, from my ranks, will be installed. The cold efficiency of it stunned her. Just like that. Just like that. He leaned over the map, his hands braced on the desk. Sentiment cannot govern a territory. His actions were not just cruel, they were stupid. They invited chaos. And I have no patience for chaos. He finally looked up at her. It is the only way to ensure this doesn't happen again, to ensure no one else is thrown through the ice. He didn't say it, but she heard it. And me? She asked, the core question. He straightened. You present a unique problem. You are, by the laws my council upholds, a member of a pack under my rule, wrongfully condemned. I have the right to offer you sanctuary anywhere in the territories, but you carry a child of unknown origin. In the eyes of many, that makes you a political vulnerability? His voice was calm, but the words were a cold shock. Leaving you here, even under a new alpha, is untenable. A gilded cage. That's what he was offering. A comfortable exile in the southern reaches, hidden away with my child. Or, the other choice, he said, his voice dropping, is to remain under my direct protection, at the capital. The capital. With him, the scandal would be immense. Because, he took a step closer, the air crackling between us, I prefer to keep my complications where I can see them. His gaze fell to my stomach. The child you carry is now under my protection as well. Suddenly the door burst open. A guard stood breathless. My king, a contingent from the Silvermane pack has arrived. They say they have come for the female. They claim she carries the air of their fallen beta. The world tilted. A lie. A political claim. Kieran's control shattered. A low growl filled the room, his eyes blazing with golden fire. The bond between us screamed with a protective fury so vast it stole my breath. He took a step, placing himself physically between her and the door, between her and the threat. His shoulders were a rigid line of tension. They demand? Kieran's voice was a soft, deadly thing. The guard flinched. They are insistent, my king. They have brought warriors. Kieran's gaze never left the middle distance, as if he could see through the walls to the approaching threat. The possessive heat she'd felt from him before was now an inferno, directed outward. Tell the Alpha of Silvermane, Kieran said, the words dropping like stones, that the female is under the protection of the Alpha King. Her child is claimed by no pack but mine. The guard paled. My king to claim an unborn child. The implications are mine to manage, Kieran snarled, finally looking at the man. Deliver the message. Word for word. As the guard hurried out, Kieran turned back to Elora. The fury was still there, but it was focused, honed. The conflict was gone from the bond, replaced by a single unwavering certainty. She stared at him, reeling, claimed by no pack but mine. It was not a claim of fatherhood. It was a claim of sovereignty, far more absolute. It was a declaration of war over her. You can't, she whispered. You'll turn every pack against you. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He didn't touch her, but his presence was overwhelming, a wall of heat and will. His eyes bored into hers, and in their golden depths she finally saw the truth he had been fighting since the moment he pulled her from the water. They threw you away, he said, his voice a raw vibration that seeped into her bones. They deemed you worthless. They tried to erase you. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, and the simmering tension snapped into something else, something hungry and undeniable. Let them see what happens when I find something others have discarded. Let them see what I choose to keep. The cliffhanger was not in words, but in the space between them. It was in his lowered head, the scant inch that separated his mouth from hers. It was in the electric anticipation that held them both captive, in the bond howling for completion, and in the devastating, terrifying realization that his next move would break every rule, defy every political calculation, and change everything forever. The space between them was a universe. It crackled with the unsaid, the undone, the unbearable pull of a truth both were refusing to name. His breath, warm and laced with that intoxicating spice, fanned across her lips. Her own caught in her throat, a prisoner of hope and terror. The bond was a live wire, screaming for connection, for the brush of skin, for the kiss that would shatter every carefully constructed barrier between a king and his complication. A shout from outside the lodge, harsh, demanding, shattered the moment like thrown glass. Kieran didn't startle, but the molten heat in his eyes hardened into something deadly. He didn't move away. He held her gaze for 1 second longer, a silent promise of a conversation violently postponed, then slowly, deliberately straightened. The absence of his nearness was a sudden chill. Stay here, he commanded, his voice a graveled echo of its earlier intensity. Do not show yourself at the window. He turned, and the shift was absolute. The man who had almost kissed her was gone, replaced by the sovereign. His stride was all authority as he moved to the door, pausing only to take his heavy fur cloak from a peg and swing it over his shoulders, the movement transforming him into a figure of imposing, regal power. He didn't look back. The moment the door closed, Elara's legs gave out. She stumbled to the nearest chair, collapsing into it, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her lips tingled. She could still feel the phantom heat of him, the magnetic field that had drawn her in. What was I doing? The thought was a frantic whisper. He was the Alpha King. He had claimed her child as a political asset. This pull between them was a dangerous illusion, a side effect of trauma and his overwhelming presence. It had to be. But the bond hummed, unsatisfied, a constant ache in her center. Curiosity and fear warred within her. She crept from the chair to the side of the window, keeping to the shadows as he'd ordered, and peered out. A scene of tense pageantry unfolded in the snowy clearing before the lodge. Kieran stood alone, A dark pillar facing a group of a dozen warriors clad in polished silver-gray furs, the Silvermane pack. They were sleek, well-armed, and their leader, a man with hair the color of iron and a haughty bearing, stood a pace ahead. Behind Kieran, his own guards formed a silent, grim line. "King Kieran?" The Silvermane leader's voice carried, oily with false deference. "I am Joran, brother to the late Betrayal. We come on a matter of honor and reclamation. Your matter had better justify crossing my border without summons," Kieran replied. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a whip-crack authority that made the Silvermane warriors shift uneasily. "We seek the female Alara of the Winter Lake Pack. It has come to our attention that she carries my brother's child. A child conceived during the peace talks at the last full moon gathering." Joran's smile was thin. "A tragic secret romance. Now, with my brother fallen, his heir must be raised within his birthright pack. We have come to collect what is ours." The lie was so brazen, so perfectly constructed, it stole the air from Alara's lungs. The last gathering had been months ago. She had attended, a silent, overlooked figure in Gree's retinue. She had never spoken to Betrayal, but who would believe her? A desperate, unmated female against the sworn testimony of a powerful pack? Kieran didn't even blink. An interesting tale. When the female herself denies, Joran's smile tightened. She is confused, grieving, ashamed perhaps. The pull of a mate bond can be overwhelming, even a secret one. We will care for her, of course. Ensure the child's legitimacy is recognized. The child's legitimacy, Kieran said, taking a single deliberate step forward, is of no concern to you. The female and the child are under my protection. They're not leaving this territory. The air grew heavy. Joran's false civility began to peel away. "With respect, my king, this is a pack matter, a blood matter. Your protection oversteps. The Council of Alphas will not look kindly on you withholding a pack's rightful heir." It was a threat thinly veiled. The council was Kieran's governing body, but it was also a check on his power. A unified complaint from a major pack like Silvermane could cause significant trouble. Kieran's laugh was a short, harsh sound. The council will hear how the Silvermane pack, upon hearing of a female's pregnancy, first left her to rot in disgrace, then only came to claim her after she was rescued from an attempted execution. They will hear how you arrived not with a mother's family, but with armed warriors, to collect her like a stray lamb. He took another step, now well into Joran's personal space. The Silvermane Alpha held his ground, but a flicker of uncertainty showed in his eyes. "You want to speak of the council? Go, file your grievance. But you will leave my territory now, and if you or any of your wolves come within a mile of that female again, I will interpret it as an act of aggression against the crown, and I will respond accordingly." The silence was absolute. The threat wasn't just political. It was primal. It echoed in the frozen trees. Joran's face mottled with rage and humiliation. He had expected political maneuvering, not a raw territorial ultimatum. Finally, he gave a stiff, jerky bow. "This is not over, King Kieran. The bloodline of Silvermane will not be ignored. It is over for today," Kieran corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned his back on them, an ultimate dismissal, and walked calmly toward the lodge. Alara shrank back from the window, her mind reeling. He had defended her. Not with careful politics, but with brute, unwavering force. He had turned a potential diplomatic incident into a stark show of dominance. For the child, she reminded herself, to protect his political asset, but the ferocity of it felt like more. The door opened, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the residual energy of his confrontation. He shrugged off his cloak, his movements controlled but charged. He didn't look at her immediately, pouring a measure of amber liquid from a decanter into a glass and draining it. "They're gone," he said, finally turning. The fierce glow had faded from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. "But they won't stay gone. The claim has been made. It gives others a pretext to challenge my keeping of you." "I never met him," Alara burst out, the need for him to believe her overwhelming all else. "Betrayal. I swear it on the moon." I saw him across the gathering hall. That's all. I know, Kieran said, simply. The certainty in those 2 words floored her. How? Because I was there, he said, setting the glass down. I remember the gathering. I remember every alpha, beta, and delegate in that room. You were with Gray's party. You stood at the back, you spoke to no one, and you left early. Kalen spent the entire night drinking and gambling with the Mountain Pack delegates. Your paths never crossed. His gaze pinned her. It's a convenient lie, one that gives them a moral right to you. Politics is often the art of plausible fiction. The fact that he had noticed her, that he remembered her presence with such detail, sent a treacherous warmth through her. She shoved it down. So, what happens now? They'll go to the council. They will. And I will be ready. He approached her again, but this time the energy was different, less of the predatory magnetism, more of a strategist assessing his pieces. The offer stands. The Southern holding is still the safest, most discreet option. And if I don't choose safety? The question was out before she could stop it. His eyes narrowed. What are you choosing, Alara? I don't know. The confession was ripped from her, laced with all her pent-up frustration and fear. I don't know what any of this means. You pull me from the water, you hold me like you care, then you speak of me as a complication. You almost... She trailed off, her face heating. You defend me from them like I'm a treasure, then offer to hide me away like a secret. What do you want from me? For a long moment, he just looked at her, and she saw the conflict raging behind his eyes. Again, the king versus the man, duty versus the insistent, undeniable pull. The bond between them throbbed in the silence. I want, he said slowly, each word carefully chosen, for you to live, for that child to live, in a world that has shown it would rather see you both dead. Everything else is a distraction we cannot afford. Liar, the bond whispered inside her, feeling the tumultuous, unspoken everything else that churned within him. Then let me stay, she heard herself say. Not in the South, here with you. At court, she lifted her chin, summoning the last dregs of her dignity. If I am to be a political piece, let me at least see the board. Let me understand the game you're playing with my life. Hiding me doesn't stop the rumors. It just lets them fester in the dark. Bring me into the light. Let them see the complication you've chosen to keep. The scandal might be the very weapon you need. She was paraphrasing his own words back to him, twisting his logic into a plea for agency. She expected dismissal, another growled order. Instead, a spark of something like respect, or perhaps surprise, lit his gaze. He studied her anew, seeing not just the victim, but the woman who had endured and was now trying to negotiate her fate. Life at court is not a sanctuary. It is a beautiful, venomous web. You will be gossiped about, scorned, approached by enemies trying to use you. Every look, every word will be dissected. I am already gossiped about, scorned and used, she said, her voice studying. The ice taught me the depth of that. At least in your viper's nest, I will know who the snakes are. A faint, actual smile, the first she'd ever seen, touched his lips. It was fleeting, but it transformed his face, making him appear younger, fiercer, more dangerously appealing. You have a fire in you, Alara of Winter Lake. They tried to drown it, but it still burns. The acknowledgement was a balm and a brand. He saw her, not just the pregnancy, the shame, the victim. He saw the strength beneath. Very well, he said, the decision made. We leave for the capital at first light. You will be introduced as my ward under my personal protection. The origin of your child will remain a mystery, and any who question it will answer to me. The predatory gleam returned. But understand this, the moment you step into my world, you play by my rules. You will trust my judgment, even when you hate it. You will follow my lead. In return, I will shield you with every power at my disposal. Do you agree? It was a bargain with a wolf, a dangerous, intoxicating pact. She had no other cards to play. I agree. He gave a single sharp nod. Then prepare. The journey is long, and the capital has little patience for weakness. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. And Alora? She looked up. His expression was unreadable. What happened before Joran interrupted? It cannot happen again. That distraction could get you killed. Remember your priority, survival. He left, closing the door on the simmering tension, on the confession he wouldn't make, on the kiss that hung between them like a ghost. The next hours were a whirlwind. Cillian brought her traveling clothes, a thicker, finer dress, a heavy cloak lined with fox fur. He also gave her a small vial. For the journey. It will steady your nerves and help with the fatigue. The king's orders. His kind eyes held sympathy. The capital is a different world, child. Keep your wits about you. At dawn, she stepped out of the lodge. A sleigh, large and sleek, harnessed to 4 powerful black wolves, waited in the snow. Kieran was already there, speaking with his captain. He saw her and went still. In the traveling clothes, with her hair braided simply and the rich fur framing her face, she did not look like a drowned outcast. She looked noble, fragile but unbroken. His gaze swept over her, and for a heartbeat, the mask of the king slipped, revealing a flash of pure, unguarded male appreciation that made her skin feel too tight. Then it was gone. Without a word, he offered his hand to help her into the sleigh. It was a courtly gesture, but the moment her bare fingers touched his gloved palm, a jolt like lightning arced up her arm. She gasped softly. His fingers tightened, almost imperceptibly, before he released her the moment she was seated. He climbed in beside her, not touching, but his presence filled the space. With a command from the driver, the wolves surged forward, and Winter Lake, the frozen lake, the pitiful huts, the life that had tried to end her began to shrink behind them. The journey was a study in restrained agony. They spoke little, only of practicalities. The landscape shifted from frozen forest to rolling, snow-dusted hills. She was acutely aware of every shift of his body, every breath he took. The bond was a constant humming awareness, a thread pulled taut between them. Sometimes, when they hit a rough patch of trail, his arm would shoot out to brace her, his hand gripping her elbow. Each touch, however brief and impersonal, was a brand that lingered. On the second evening, they made camp in the shelter of a cliff face. The guards set up tents, built a fire. Ilar sat on a log, wrapped in her cloak, watching the flames. Kieran stood at the edge of the firelight, looking out into the darkness, a silhouette of solitary power. One of the younger guards, emboldened by the journey's fatigue, brought her a bowl of stew. "My lady," he said with a friendly smile. "You should eat." Before she could thank him, Kieran was there. He didn't move quickly, but his presence was suddenly overwhelming. He took the bowl from the guard's hands, his gaze holding the younger man's. "I will see to her needs," he said, his voice low but carrying a warning rumble. The guard paled, bowed, and scurried away. Kieran knelt before her, holding out the bowl. His eyes reflected the fire, glowing like embers. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "He was just being kind." "I know what he was being," Kieran said, his voice a low vibration that only she could hear. The possessiveness was back, raw and untamed. "And you are not for their kindness, or their scrutiny, or their thoughts. You are under my protection. That means from everything. Even perceived threats." He held her gaze, the unspoken words hanging in the cold air. "You are mine to protect. Mine to watch over. Mine." He stayed there, kneeling in the snow before her, a king serving an outcast, until she took the bowl with trembling hands. As she did, her fingers brushed his. This time, he didn't pull away. He let the contact linger, a silent, electrifying communion in the crackling firelight. The cliffhanger wasn't in a shout or a revelation. It was in that touch. It was in the way his eyes darkened, the way his breath stilled. It was in the terrifying, glorious understanding that his rules were already crumbling, and the distraction he'd sworn to avoid was now the only thing either of them could think about. The capital awaited with all its vipers, but here, in the wilds, a far more dangerous surrender was quietly, inevitably beginning. The world became stone and sound. The capital of the Northern Territories was not a city as humans might understand it, but a vast, ancient fortress built into the living rock of the mountains. The Black Citadel. Towers clawed at a sky the color of iron, linked by arches that seemed to defy gravity. Waterfalls, frozen into great cascades of blue-white ice, framed the main gates. The air hummed with power, the collective presence of hundreds of powerful wolves, the thrum of politics, the weight of history. It smelled of snow, forge fire, pine, and ambition. As the sleigh passed through the towering gates, Alara felt the eyes. From the battlements, from the arched windows, from the crowded courtyards, whispers trailed them like phantom fingers. They did not look at their king with reverence, but at her with a sharp, calculating curiosity. The ward from the fallen Winter Lake pack, the pregnant mystery. Kieran, beside her, had transformed utterly. The man who had knelt by the firelight was buried beneath layers of imperious authority. His expression was carved from the same granite as his fortress, unreadable and cold. He did not acknowledge the stares. He simply existed as the apex predator in this concrete jungle, and the pack adjusted around him, giving way with bowed heads and averted eyes. The sleigh stopped in an inner courtyard. Before Alara could move, Kieran was out, offering his hand. The touch was the same as Joel, a connection, but his grip was brief, impersonal. A king assisting a subject. He released her as soon as her feet touched the flagstones. "Lyra," he said, his voice carrying. A woman, severe and graceful, with silver-streaked dark hair braided tightly back, stepped forward. She wore a simple gray dress, but her bearing was that of a general. "This is Alara. She is to be installed in the Sun Tower chambers. She is under my personal protection. You will see to her needs and her security. No one sees her without my express permission." Lyra's sharp eyes assessed Alara in one swift, comprehensive glance. There was no judgment, only pure, ruthless efficiency. "Understood, my king. Alara, Lyra commands my personal guard. You will listen to her as you would to me." His gaze finally flicked to her, and for a fraction of a second, the mask cracked, revealing a hint of the fierce protectiveness from the wilderness. "Rest. You will be summoned for the evening meal in the Great Hall." With that, he turned and was gone, swept into a current of waiting advisors and officials. Lyra's presence was a different kind of shield. "This way," she said, her tone not unkind, but offering no room for questions. Alara followed, her legs aching from the journey, the weight of the citadel pressing down on her. The Sun Tower chambers were not a prison. They were breathtaking. A series of spacious rooms with vaulted ceilings and walls of pale gold stone that seemed to drink in the weak winter light. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in. Thick rugs covered the floor, and the furniture was elegant, ancient, and solid. A connecting door led to a bedroom with a vast bed hung with silvery gauze. It was a gilded cage of the highest order. "Your belongings will be brought up. A maid will attend you. Do not leave these rooms without an escort from my detail," Lyra instructed, standing by the door. "The king's word is law here, but his court is full of those who look for weaknesses in his armor. You, right now, are perceived as a weakness. Do not give them an opportunity to test that perception." "Why are you helping me?" Alara asked quietly. Lyra's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I do not help you. I follow my king's orders. But I have served him since he took the throne. I have never seen him bring a stranger into the heart of the citadel, let alone install them here." She paused, her gaze lingering on Alara's face. "That makes you either a catastrophic vulnerability or a weapon of immense value. My duty is to ensure you are the latter, or at least that you do not become the former. Rest." Alone, the silence of the rooms was deafening. The bond was a dull, persistent ache. Kieran was close. She could feel the direction of him, a pull toward the heart of the citadel, but he felt distant, walled off behind layers of duty and stone. The isolation was more profound than in the Winter Lake hut. There, she'd been an outcast. Here, she was a specimen. The promised maid arrived, a silent girl named Fenna who helped her bathe in a sunken tub of miraculously hot water and change into one of the gowns that had appeared at deep green velvet, simple but exquisitely made. It draped over her body, accommodating the swell of her pregnancy without highlighting it. Looking in the polished silver mirror, Alara barely recognized herself. The woman who stared back had shadows under her eyes, but her cheekbones seemed sharper, her gaze clearer. There was a dignity in the fine fabric that her old self had never known. When a guard came to escort her to the Great Hall, her heart was a trapped bird in her chest. The hall was a cavern of noise and light. Long tables ran its length, packed with warriors, dignitaries, and elegantly dressed courtiers. Tapestries depicting great battles and legendary shifts covered the walls. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat the high table. And there at its center was Kieran. He was resplendent in a black tunic embroidered with silver thread that caught the firelight. A simple circlet of dark metal rested on his brow. He was speaking to a stunningly beautiful woman on his right, who leaned toward him with an intimate smile, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She had hair like spun gold and eyes of a piercing, cold blue. The sight was a physical blow. Alara froze at the entrance. The guard nudged her gently forward. A path cleared as she walked, but the conversations didn't hush. They dipped, then resumed with renewed fervor. She felt every glance like a slap. Lyra appeared at her side, steering her toward the high table. Head high, you belong here by the king's decree. That is all that matters. She was seated not at the high table, but at the table immediately below the dais, to the right. A place of honor, but separate, isolated. She could see Kieran perfectly. He hadn't looked at her. He was still engrossed in conversation with the golden-haired woman, who laughed at something he said, the sound like tinkling, sharp ice. A plate of food appeared before her, but the aroma of roasted meat and herbs turned her stomach. The bond was a knot of confusion and a strange, sharp hurt. She focused on her hands, folded in her lap. So you're the Winterlake stray. The voice was male, smooth and lightly mocking. She looked up. A man had taken the empty seat beside her. He was handsome, with fox-like features and russet hair, his eyes a tawny brown that held a glint of amusement. He wore rich robes, but they seemed at odds with his sharp, restless energy. I am Alara. Kaelin, he said, inclining his head. Courtier, gossip, and occasional thorn in the king's side. I must say you've caused quite a stir. The great Ice King bringing home a wounded dove, and a pregnant one at that. The betting pools are wild who sired it. Is it a political play? Or is our king simply developing a heretofore unknown taste for charity? His words were designed to provoke. Alara reached for the calm, still center that had kept her alive in Winterlake. I am under the king's protection. The reasons are his own. Oh, I'm sure they are, Kaelin chuckled, sipping his wine. But this court feeds on reasons. And in the absence of facts, we invent them. For instance, Lady Seraphina, he nodded subtly toward the golden-haired woman beside Kieran, is currently inventing the narrative that you are a distant, pathetic cousin he's taken in out of obligation to a dead ally. She finds that less threatening than other possibilities. Alara's eyes were drawn again to the woman, Seraphina, who now had her hand on Kieran's wrist. He didn't shake it off. Why would I be a threat to her? Kellen's smile widened. Because, my dear dove, Seraphina has been positioning herself as the future queen since the last one died. A mysterious, protected female of childbearing age, installed in the Sun Tower? That's not a cousin. That's a complication for her ambitions. The political web Lyra had warned her about was already twisting around her. She felt a surge of nausea, but also a spark of defiance. I have no interest in being anyone's queen. What a refreshing thing to hear in this den of ambition, Kaelin mused. I almost believe you, but it doesn't matter what you want. It matters what you represent. And right now, you represent a question mark on Kieran's otherwise calculable ledger. And question marks make powerful people. Nervous, finally, as if sensing the intensity of the discussion about him, Kieran's gaze lifted from Seraphina and swept across the hall. It passed over the crowds, over Kaelin, and landed on Alara. The connection was a physical shock in the noisy room. His expression didn't change, but his eyes held hers for 3 long heartbeats. In them, she saw no warmth, no recognition of their firelit moment. She saw only the king, assessing his ward. Then his eyes dropped to Kaelin beside her, and a faint warning frown appeared between his brows before he turned back to Seraphina. The dismissal was more brutal than any insult. "Ah," Kaelin whispered, having caught the exchange. "Interesting. The Ice King doesn't like me talking to his new pet. Not even a glance for the lovely Seraphina, but a glare for me. I'll consider myself warned." He rose, giving an exaggerated bow. "A pleasure, Laura. I'm sure we'll speak again. Do try to survive. You're the most entertaining thing to happen here in years." He melted into the crowd. Alara was left alone again, the fine food ash in her mouth, the laughter and music a jarring cacophony. She endured another interminable hour before she could slip away, claiming fatigue, escorted silently back to the sun tower by a guard. The rooms were too quiet. The fire had died to embers. She stood at the window, looking out at the stark, beautiful terror of the Black Citadel, feeling more alone than she had in a frozen lake. There, the enemy was clear. Here, the enemy was a smile, a rumor, a touch on a king's arm, and the king's own impenetrable facade. A soft knock came at the connecting door to the bedchamber, not the main hall door. Before she could answer, it opened. Kieran stood there. He had discarded his circlet and formal overrobe. His black tunic was untied at the throat, his sleeves rolled up. He looked less like a king and more like the warrior who had pulled her from the water. And he was in her private chamber. "You should be asleep," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. "I couldn't." She didn't turn from the window. "Your court is overwhelming." She heard him move closer. The hum of the bond, which had been a dull throb, ignited into a sharp ache. He stopped behind her, not touching. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the smoke, and spice cutting through the stale scent of the hall's rushes. Kaelin is a provocateur. His words are meant to unsettle. You would do well to avoid him. He was the only one who spoke to me, she said, a bitter edge in her voice. Aside from your guard, and you seemed otherwise occupied. Silence. Then, Seraphina is the daughter of the Ridgeback Alpha. An alliance with our pack is advantageous. Her presence at my side is political. You don't have to explain your courtly maneuvers to me, she said, but the hurt was evident, bleeding into every word. Elara. He said her name like a command and a plea. He was close enough now that his breath stirred the hair at her temple. What you saw in the wilderness, what you may feel. It cannot exist here. Here, I am not a man. I am the crown. Every look, every word is a piece on a board. If they were to suspect, if they knew the depth of my... He cut himself off, the sentence ending in a growl of frustration. It would make you the target of every enemy I have. They would use you to break me. She finally turned to face him. In the dim light, his face was all stark angles and shadows, his eyes glowing faintly. The mask was gone. Here was the conflict, raw and raging. The depth of your what? She whispered, daring him, the bond screaming between them. He didn't answer with words. His gaze dropped to her lips, and the hunger she saw there stole her breath. His control was a thin, fraying wire. One hand lifted, as if to touch her face, then fisted at his side. You are my ward, he ground out, as if reminding himself. That is the only truth that can keep you safe. It's a lie, she breathed, taking a half step closer, erasing the last inch of safe distance. The air crackled. We both know it's a lie. I can feel it. You can too. A tremor ran through him. His eyes blazed. Elara, don't. Or what? The defiance born of loneliness and longing surged. You'll send me away? You'll throw me to the wolves like they did? I think you're afraid of a different kind of fall. That did it. The frayed wire snapped. With a sound that was almost a groan, his hand came up, not to strike, but to cup the back of her neck. His touch was not gentle. It was desperate, possessive. He pulled her to him, and his mouth crashed down on hers. The world exploded. The bond, silent and straining for days, erupted into a symphony of fire and light. It was not a gentle awakening, but a claiming. His lips were fierce, demanding an answer to a question they'd both been afraid to ask, and she answered. She melted into him, her hands fisting in the fabric of his tunic, pulling him closer. A tiny, broken sound escaped her, a sob of relief, of surrender, of pure, unadulterated need. He kissed her like a dying man finding water, like a king casting aside his crown. It was all heat and spice, and a raw, untamed passion that shook her to her soul. His other arm banded around her waist, crushing her against him, and she could feel the furious, wild beat of his heart against hers. For endless moments, there was no citadel, no court, no past, no future. There was only this, the searing truth of the mate bond igniting, the rightness of his mouth on hers, the feeling of being utterly, completely known and wanted. It was he who broke the kiss, tearing his mouth from hers with a ragged gasp. He rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming in harsh pants, his body trembling with the effort to stop. His eyes were closed, his expression one of agonized ecstasy. "This," he whispered, voice raw, "is why it can't happen. Because I cannot think. I cannot rule. I can only feel you." He opened his eyes, and the gold was molten, full of a terrifying love and a devastating fear. "They can't know. No one can know what you are to me. It is the only way to protect you." Before she could respond, before she could even process his confession, "What you are to me," a frantic pounding came on the main chamber door. "My king." Lyra's voice, strained and urgent, cut through the intimate silence. "You are needed immediately." A rider from Silvermane with a formal challenge from the council. And the healer, Cillian, he sent a falcon. "It's about Elara." He said it's urgent. The passion in Kieran's eyes iced over into instant, deadly focus. The lover was gone, the king violently reasserted. He released her, stepping back as if burned. The cliffhanger hung not in the political threat, but in the space between their bodies, still humming with the echo of the kiss. It was in the devastating choice now written in the stark lines of his face, the mate he had just claimed, or the kingdom that was demanding his attention. And in the terrifying, unknown message from Cillian that promised to change everything about the life and the child she carried. The kiss still burned on her lips, a phantom brand, as the whirl of stone and politics came crashing back in. Kieran's transformation was instantaneous and brutal. The raw, vulnerable man who had just claimed her mouth vanished, replaced by the sovereign. He didn't look at her again. His gaze was already on the door, on the threat beyond. "Not a word," he said, his voice a low, hard command that brooked no argument. It wasn't just an order. It was a shield. He was locking away what had just happened, fortifying the walls around them both. "Stay here." "Lyra." He strode from the bedchamber, pulling the door shut behind him. Elara stood frozen, her fingers touching her swollen lips. The bond was alive, singing thing in her chest, no longer a faint hum, but a resonant chord that had been struck into existence. "What you are to me." He had said it. And then he had shown her, but the sweetness of it was already curdled by the acid of fear, urgent, from Cillian. She rushed to the door, pressing her ear against the cold wood. "The challenge is formal, my king." Lyra's voice was tight, delivered by a full Silvermane envoy under a council seal. "They demand Elara be surrendered to their custody pending an investigation into the paternity of her child. They cite ancient laws of bloodline preservation. And Cillian's message?" Kieran's voice was ice. A rustle of paper. "The falcon arrived minutes ago. It's coded, but the decryption is clear." He reran the tests on the fetal energy signature, the ones he took at the lodge. He says the results are biologically impossible. The child's lineage signature carries a marker he's only seen in one bloodline. The royal bloodline. Kieran, he says the child bears the mark of the first kings. The silence in the outer chamber was deafening, more terrifying than any shout. Alara's legs gave way. She slid down the door, her back against it, a hand flying to her stomach. Biologically impossible, royal bloodline. The first kings. The words meant nothing and everything. A cold deeper than the lake seeped into her soul. She had never been with a man. The child was a mystery, a miracle, or a curse, and now Cillian was saying it was royal? Kieran's voice, when it came, was dangerously quiet. Is he certain? He staked his life on the parchment, my king. He suggests a latent, recessive gene, activated by some unknown catalyst. A once-in-a-millennium fluke? Or it's not a fluke. Kieran finished, his tone grim. If this gets out, the challenge from Silvermane will be the least of our concerns. Every alpha with a drop of ambition will see her not as a disgraced female, but as a vessel of a myth, a key to the oldest power in our history. They will tear the territories apart to control her, or destroy her. What is your command? Lock down the Sun Tower, triple the guard. No one in or out without my direct sign. I will address the Silvermane envoy in the Hall of Justice. Now. Elara heard his footsteps retreat. She scrambled to her feet, pulling the door open just as Lyra was turning toward the main exit. The guard captain's face was grim. You heard, Lyra stated. What does it mean? Elara's voice trembled. It means, Lyra said, moving to the main door to bolt it, that the game has changed. Drastically. You are no longer just a political complication or a king's guarded secret. If Cillian is right, you are the most significant political entity in the Northern Territories aside from the king himself. And you carry the ultimate symbol of legitimacy. I don't understand. How can this be? Lyra's gaze was pitying and fierce. I don't know. But understanding will have to wait. Survival comes first. The king must publicly discredit and dismiss the Silvermane challenge before this new information leaks. If they get even a whisper of it, they will not rest. For hours, Elara paced the gilded cage. The bond was a storm of conflict. She could feel Kieran's rage, his calculated coldness, his fierce, unwavering focus. And beneath it all, a new terrifying layer of possessiveness that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the bond they had just sealed. His mate. Carrying a child of ancient royal lineage. The combination was volatile beyond measure. Dusk was painting the mountains in shades of violet when the summons came. Not from a guard, but from Kieran himself. He stood in her doorway, backlit by torchlight from the corridor. He was in full regalia again, but his face was etched with a fatigue no crown could hide. Come, he said. You need to hear this. Hear what? The sound of a threat being extinguished. His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting second, the mask slipped, and she saw the man who had kissed her, the man who was fighting a war on a dozen fronts for her. Trust me. She followed him through the labyrinthine corridors of the Citadel, down to the Hall of Justice, a vast, circular chamber with tiers of stone seats rising around a central floor. It was packed. Alphas, betas, and elders from packs visiting the capital filled the benches. The air buzzed with tension. In the center stood the Silvermane envoy, Joran, looking smug beside a severe-looking elder holding a scroll with a dangling seal. Kieran did not take a seat. He walked Elara to a stone dais to the side of the main floor, a place of visibility. He placed her there, his hand on her elbow for a brief, steadying moment that sent a shock through the crowd. Then he stepped down into the center, facing Joran. The challenge has been heard, Kieran began, his voice ringing clear in the acoustically perfect chamber. Silvermane Pack claims blood right to the female, Elara, and her unborn child, citing an alleged union with the late Beta Kylan. I have investigated this claim. There are no witnesses. There is no record of interaction. The female denies it. The timeline does not hold. It is a fabrication. Joran sneered. She would deny it. And your investigation is merely your word, King Kieran. The child could be my brother's heir. The possibility alone grants us rights under the law of lineage. The law of lineage, Kieran echoed, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more threatening. An interesting choice. That same law states that any claim of lineage can be superseded by a higher, more direct claim. A claim not of potential, but of certain protection. He paused, letting the silence thicken. Then he turned, not to the council elder, but to the tiers of watching alphas. He was speaking to the entire territory now. This female was subjected to a barbaric execution by her own pack for the crime of carrying a child of unknown origin. I intervened. By the ancient rights of the crown, when justice fails at the pack level, it defaults to the throne. I claimed her as a ward of the crown. Her life, her safety, and the safety of her child are now matters of royal decree. They are under my protection. Not as a potential heir to some minor pack bloodline, but as subjects of the king, Joran sputtered. You cannot just claim everyone. This is an overreach. The council, Kieran interrupted, his voice sharpening like a blade, will uphold the king's right to protect the defenseless from predatory packs seeking to exploit tragedy for political gain. His gaze swept the room, alpha by alpha, a silent challenge. Is there any alpha here who wishes to dispute my right to shield one of our own from murder, and then from being seized as a breeding chattel? Speak now. The silence was absolute. No one moved. To dispute him was to condone what Winterlake had done, and to align with Silvermane's transparent greed. It was political suicide. Joran's face was purple with rage. This is not over. We will appeal to the full assembly. Appeal all you wish, Kieran said, dismissing him with a tone of finality. But hear this, and hear it clearly. The female Alara and her child are under my protection. Any attempt to remove them, any threat against them, any slight toward them, I will consider a direct challenge to my authority. And I will answer it not with council petitions, but with tooth and claw. The audience is concluded. It was a masterstroke. He had framed it not as a personal obsession, but as a matter of royal justice and moral necessity. He had painted Silvermane as vultures and himself as the unassailable guardian. The political threat was neutralized, for now. But as the crowd began to murmur and disperse, Alara saw the looks. The calculation hadn't left their eyes. It had deepened. They weren't looking at a pathetic ward anymore. They were looking at a woman for whom the Alpha King had just publicly drawn a line in the stone, a line he promised to defend with war. Her value, her mystery, had just skyrocketed. Kieran returned to her, his expression unreadable. It's done. Is it? She whispered as he guided her from the dais. They're more curious than ever. Curiosity is not a crime. Conspiracy is. I have made the consequences of conspiracy clear. He took her not back to the Sun Tower, but to his own private chambers, a sparser, larger suite dominated by a map-covered table and a wall of windows overlooking the abyss of the mountains. He bolted the door. The moment they were alone, the public facade crumbled. He leaned back against the door, running a hand over his face, the weight of the day evident in every line of his body. Cillian's discovery changes everything, he said, his voice weary. Tell me what it means, she pleaded, standing in the center of the room, feeling adrift. The First Kings? What is that? He pushed off the door and walked to the window, staring into the gathering dark. 1,000 years ago, the first shifters were led by a single royal bloodline. They were said to be stronger, closer to the moon's magic. The line was thought to have died out centuries ago, diluted into nothing. The modern royal title is elective, based on power, not pure lineage. He turned to look at her, his eyes glowing softly in the twilight. For a child to carry a pure, dominant marker of that bloodline, it's not just rare, it's a paradigm shift. That child, in the eyes of many, would have a divine right to rule that supersedes any elected king. The enormity of it settled on her like a mountain. So my child is a threat to you. In 2 strides, he was before her. He grasped her shoulders, his touch firm, his gaze burning. No, listen to me. The child is ours to protect. This is not about thrones. This is about truth. Your truth. His thumb stroked her collarbones, a soothing gesture at odds with the intensity in his eyes. The healer thinks it's a latent gene, a miracle, but there is another possibility. One only you can answer. What possibility? He searched her face. Was there anything? Any strange encounter, any gift, any touch from someone of the old families? Anything you dismissed as a dream? Memories flashed the loneliness of Winterlake, the quiet desperation. And then one hazy, half-remembered night from the spring before, the Moon Festival. She had wandered away from the bonfire, feeling out of place. In the sacred grove, an old traveling storyteller, a man from no pack, had taken her hand. His eyes had been kind, milky with age. He pressed a warm, smooth moonstone into her palm. For the one who sees the moon in the water, he'd said. A strange heat had flooded her hand, up her arm, settling in her chest before fading. She'd thought it was the mead. She'd lost the stone the next day. She'd forgotten. She told Kieran, the memory spilling out in broken fragments. When she finished, he was statue still. A wandering elder. A moonstone. A breath hissed out between his teeth. There are tailies of the last keepers of the bloodline, hiding, waiting for a vessel pure of heart to reignite the line. A miraculous conception triggered by a transfer of essence, not by flesh. A sob caught in her throat. So, I am a vessel? A tool in some ancient prophecy? No! The word was a roar. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. His heart hammered against her cheek. You are Alara. You are the woman who survived the ice. You are the woman who stands in the viper's nest with her head high. You are my... He choked on the word, then forced it out, raw and true. You are my mate. I felt it the moment I pulled you from the water. I have fought it every second since, because the world will use you to destroy me, or use me to destroy you. But I am done fighting. He pulled back, cradling her face in his hands. His eyes were pools of molten gold, full of fear and unwavering certainty. The child you carry is a miracle. Its origin may be magic, not man. That makes it no less yours. And if it carries the old blood, then we will protect it, together, as mates. As king and queen, if that's what it takes. It was a declaration more profound than any kiss. It was a surrender and a claiming all at once. He was choosing her and the terrifying future she carried over the safe stability of his rule. But the court, the council, she whispered, her hands coming up to cover his, will learn that their king has found his fated queen, and that she carries the future, both ancient and new. It will be the greatest political fight of my life, but it is a fight I will wage gladly. He leaned his forehead against hers. Do you understand? I am not asking you to be my ward. I'm asking you to be my partner, to stand beside me. It will be hard. It will be dangerous. They will call you a witch, a usurper, a fraud. They will try to tear you down. Her heart felt too large for her chest. The longing she had starved on for a lifetime met the fierce hope in his eyes. This was the choice, a hidden, safe life in the South, or a visible, dangerous life at his side, with truth as their shield. She thought of the ice, of the silence of the deep, of the loneliness that had been her constant companion. Then she thought of his arms around her, his kiss, the bond singing between them like a promise. I am tired of hiding, she said, her voice gaining strength. I am tired of being a secret. They threw me away, but you saw me. You see me. So let them see what we are. Together. The relief that washed over his features was breathtaking. It was the look of a man who had finally come home. He kissed her again, but this time it was different, softer, deeper, a seal on a covenant. It was a kiss full of promise and peril. When they parted, a new resolve settled in his eyes. Then we begin tomorrow. We will present ourselves before the full court, but tonight. He swept her into his arms, carrying her to the connected bedchamber, a room of stark beauty and power. Tonight is for us, for the bond, for the truth between us, before we give it to the wolves. He laid her on the furs, his body covering hers, not with conquest, but with reverence. The mate bond, now acknowledged, flared to life, a golden thread weaving their souls together. There were no more words as clothes were shed and skin met skin. His touches were worship and claim, gentle and desperate. And when they finally joined, it was not just a physical act, but a completion. The bond snapped into its full, glorious place, a radiant network of light and feeling that connected them on every level. She saw his memories, the weight of the crown, the loneliness of power, the moment he saw her through the ice and felt his world shift. He felt hers, the cold, the fear, the quiet strength, the spark of life within her that hummed with an ancient, potent song. It was overwhelming. It was healing. It was theirs. Later, wrapped in his arms, the world outside forgotten, she traced the lines of his chest. What if they never accept us? His arms tightened around her. Then we will build a new world. But we will do it together. He placed a hand on her stomach where their miraculous child slept. All three of us? For the first time since the ice cracked, Alara felt not just safe, but truly, deeply loved. And powerful. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.